Hi guys, how are you doing today? Welcome back to Random Lifestyle Vlog. If you're new here, my name is Paulina. This channel is all about beauty, and today we're going to be testing and reviewing all three of the Hourglass Festive face palettes. So this is the third time in a row that they released three palettes for like three different skin tones, and this is actually the third time in a row I picked up all of them because they all look pretty stunning. So I'll be testing them on my medium skin tone. We'll see how this is going to work. I also have all the previous releases here with me so that we can compare these to the new palettes and see how similar or different they are. So what we're going to do today is we're going to swatch every single one of these palettes. We're going to compare it to the previous two releases, and we're obviously going to test it. So without further ado, let's start. Oh, and quite an important detail I almost forgot. These palettes are priced at £90 each, which I'm not going to lie, that is actually pretty pricey, but I usually look for a discount before I buy them, and usually you'll be able to find them with like a 10% discount or so, and that actually makes quite a difference, especially at that price point. Okay, let's start our review. I'm going to begin with this lightest Dragon palette. And this is what it looks like. So this palette is supposed to be suitable for like lighter skin tones, from fair to maybe light medium. I would say it does look pretty light to me. It's probably going to be a little bit too light for me, but I hope I can pull it off to some extent to make it at least a little bit visible on my skin. Anyway, let's have a closer look at the shades first. So first up, we have finishing powder in shade Dream Light, and this is the only shade in this palette that is not new. So all the other shades are new releases. This is the only one that already existed before this palette was released, and this is actually a pretty exciting thing about this year's holiday palettes. They all are filled with like new shades. I think every single one of these palettes has only like one old shade and everything else is new, so that is pretty cool. Anyway, our finishing powder in shade Dreamlight, this is described as Cool Pearl with soft lavender sheen. Next up, we have a blush in shade Peach Fusion, and this is described as soft peach pink. Then we have a finishing powder in shade Divine Light, and this one is described as translucent with sheer pink sheen. Now the bottom row, we have a blush in shade Mauve Haze, and this is described as soft plum blush. Next, a bronzer in soft bronze. This is matte natural bronze. And then lastly, we have a highlighter in Sunlit Strobe Light, and it's supposed to be pale pink champagne shade. So these are the shades. Let's give them a quick swatch. I'm going to start with those finishing powders because I don't really think they're going to be that visible on my skin, but let's see. So this one here is a Dream Light. So this is the Cool Pearl with soft lavender sheen. It's actually quite visible on my skin, but you can see it's definitely much lighter than my skin tone. But that's not really a massive problem. I can still use it as a brightening powder. And here we have the Divine Light one. Same story. This is definitely too light for me, but it should work perfectly as a brightening powder. So next up, the blushes. I'm going to start with the Peach Fusion one. That is a really pretty color, but if you have medium skin tone like I do, I think it will require some building up. And then we have the other blush, which is Mauve Haze, and this one's actually a bit more pigmented. Okay, time for our bronzer. Okay, that's not bad. I'm pretty sure I can make it work for my skin tone. And then the highlighter is last here, and I really love this kind of like a champagne-y tone. This is going to be actually perfect for like lighter skin tones, and it's not always been the case. I mean, let me show you what I mean. So let's compare this palette to the previous lightest releases. Okay, so this is where it all started. This is the lightest palette from the 2022 collection, and these are the shades. Like, what do you think? Like, honestly, to me, this is the weirdest palette ever. So we have like these two finishing powders and this highlighter here that I would say are perfect for like lighter skin tones. Then we have these two very intense blushes, which I guess they could be used on a lighter skin tone if you choose that type of look, but these are probably not the most obvious colors that you would pick up. And then we have this highlighter, which to me doesn't make sense at all. This is like a very yellowy golden highlighter, and I honestly cannot imagine how this would actually work on anyone with like a lighter skin tone. This highlighter would look beautiful on a medium or like tan skin tone with like some warm undertone, but I honestly think this is going to be too yellow for anyone with like a lighter skin tone. So this palette, honestly, I don't think it made much sense. Not to mention there's no bronzer in here. So you only have these 2 blushes, 2 highlighters, and then 2 finishing powders. And just to compare, this is our 2024 palette. I mean, one look at it and it just makes so much more sense. You have a bronzer here, the highlighter is much more suitable for lighter skin tones. And the following year in 2023, this jellyfish palette was released for the lighter skin tones. And I honestly think they fixed what was wrong with our palette, because look at this. This is a really beautiful light skin tone palette. We have a bronzer, we have 2 finishing powders, we have a highlighter, 2 blushes. Everything makes sense here. I actually really like this palette. I can make it work for my winter skin. Whenever I get like a little bit of tan, it becomes a little bit too light for me. But nevertheless, this is actually a really beautiful palette. Okay, so let's compare this one to the newest release, the Dragon palette. And listen, they both look really beautiful. They both look suitable for like lighter skin tones, and there are differences. They don't look very much alike. So if you have this jellyfish palette from last year and you're considering buying this year's release as well, you don't have to be worried about these being too similar, because they're not. You can see quite a lot of differences. You have like different blush shades. The bronzer is on much cooler side this year too. So yeah, this is pretty much how these compare. So with that being said, let's test this palette out. So we actually have 2 blushes, 1 bronzer and 1 highlighter. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to start with the bronzer. We're going to see if this is going to be even visible on my skin, and I'm going to test 2 blushes on like each side of my face. So I'm starting with the bronzer. And listen, I definitely need to build it up properly for this to be even visible on my skin, which I guess is fine. This palette is technically for like lighter skin tones, so if the bronzer is suitable for like my skin type, it might actually be too dark for people with like lighter skin tones. So I guess that makes sense. I mean, I can make it work to some extent, but the result is very subtle. Again, this is probably going to be my winter palette. It's definitely going to work much better on my skin when it's a little bit lighter. So yeah, as you can see, the color shows a little bit, but I have to build it up like properly, which is fine, but I probably wouldn't recommend buying this palette if your skin is like darker than mine, because you're probably not going to get much use of that. I mean, you can build this bronzer only so much, right? Okay, the blushes now. I'm going to start this peachy blush and I'm going to apply it on the side of my face. So let's try it out. This one didn't actually swatch that well. It was very subtle on my skin, so I might have to build it up a little bit too. Do you know what? It is very subtle, but it actually looks quite pretty on my skin. It definitely works as kind of like a subtle blush. I don't think I need to actually build it up that much. I think it looks quite pretty being on this kind of like a subtle side. So yeah, that's pretty good. Okay, time for the other blush. I'm going to apply this on the other side of my face. Okay, same story here. Quite subtle, but it looks really pretty. So again, it doesn't really need much building up. I think it looks pretty being that subtle. So far I would say if you have a medium skin tone and you decide to buy this palette, you will probably have to put some effort to make this bronzer work for you, but everything else actually looks pretty good. Okay, time for our highlighter. I mean, I can't really see this not working. So let's try it out. Oh, it's beautiful. And I also love how like finely milled this highlighter is. It's not going to accentuate like any imperfections, anything like that. This is glowy, but not shiny, not sparkly, just like beautiful glow. I mean, look at that. Okay, let's just apply this on the other side of my face as well. I mean, as you can see, I have these 2 kind of like little holes on the side of my face. I used to have dermal piercings here, so these usually show me how much the texture on your skin is going to be accentuated by a highlighter. And listen, like pretty much any type of like glowy highlighter is going to accentuate texture in your skin, but I don't think this highlighter is accentuating these little holes, and these are pretty visible like no matter what I do, but I don't think this highlighter is accentuating these that much. So I think even if you have textured skin, this highlighter is a pretty safe, especially if you kind of like blend everything together nicely. Okay, so far so good. Now we have 2 finishing powders. So this one over here is definitely too light for my skin tone, but the way I would use that, I would actually use it as a brightening highlighter under my eyes. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use a little bit of that and kind of set this area under my eyes. And by the way, these finishing powders, they have just some magical properties or something. I don't know, but they just make your skin look instantly so much better. Like you have a filter on or something. I don't know if you can see the difference already, but it's literally like it brightened this part of my face and kind of like blurred it slightly. I just love it. So yeah, that's that. So whenever I have a finishing powder from Hourglass that's too light for me, I'm not worried at all. This is how I use it. I just use it to brighten this under eye area. And you know what, I'm going to take a risk and I'm going to apply this finishing powder, which is a little bit darker. I'm going to apply it like all over my face to kind of blend everything together. We'll see how this is going to work. I mean, these are not like super pigmented, so I hope I'm not going to make myself look ridiculous. No, I think it's going to be all right. I think this is probably a little bit too light, but nothing crazy. So I always apply those finishing powders like all over my face to blend everything together and to give this kind of like a your skin but better look to my skin. Okay, so this is the Dragon palette on my medium skin tone. What do you think? So I have the peachy blush on this side of my face and the purpley one here. I think they both actually look really pretty, very subtle. The highlighter is really pretty. This lightest finishing powder works perfectly as a brightening powder, and this one I can pull it off like all over my face. So the only shade that's not particularly suitable for my skin tone, and I kind of like need to build it up a little bit, is the bronzer here. Okay, so that's that, the last look on my face with this Dragon palette, and now I'm going to wash off the bottom part of my face and we're going to test the medium palette. Alright, so let's talk about the medium palette for this year, which is the Evil Eye palette. So there you go. They're actually very creative with these designs, and this is our palette. That looks so pretty, and this is definitely this perfect medium skin tone palette. So what do we have here? So first up we have this finishing powder in Soft Light. So this is the only not new shade in this palette. So as I mentioned, all the other shades in this palette are going to be new. So this shade here is described as Pale Peach. Then we have a highlighter in Rose Gold Strobe Light, and this is described as Soft Rose Gold. And then the end of this top row is blush in shade Pink Fusion, and this shade is described as Cool Pink. Then we have a blush in shade Oasis Glow, and this is Shimmering Warm Apricot. Another blush in shade Vibrant Coral, and this is described as True Coral. And then we have a bronzer in Natural Bronze, and this is Matte Medium Bronze. Okay, so that's pretty cool. We have one bronzer, one highlighter, one finishing powder, and 3 blushes. So let's do the swatches. I'm going to start with the finishing powder, which is going to be perfectly suitable for my skin tone, and you can pretty much tell it's very close to my skin tone. Next up, the highlighter. That is very pretty. And the bronzer. And now the blushes. So the first one is this Cool Pink. Then we have Oasis Glow. And the last one is the True Coral. So that definitely looks like a perfect medium tone palette. So let's compare our Evil Eye palette to the palettes from previous years. So I'm going to start with the Elephant palette from 2022, and this palette is probably the one I use the most out of this whole 2022 collection. So let me show you how it looks inside. So these are the shades. It actually looks quite pretty, doesn't it? The problem I had with this palette was that this was probably more suitable for like light medium skin tone. So this is again one of those palettes I use in winter when my skin is a little bit on a lighter side of medium. I think this bottom row here is generally on a lighter side. Both blushes and the bronzer are quite subtle, so it's not the palette that will work for me when I have a little bit of tan on my skin, for example. But other than that, this is the only palette from 2022 that had like everything in it. So we have some blushes, a bronzer, a highlighter, and finishing powders. The light skin tone palette that year didn't have a bronzer, and a similar story was with the darkest palette. This palette was the only one that was like fully comprehensive. So let's compare the Elephant palette to the Evil Eye one, and there you go. So these are these two palettes next to each other. This new Evil Eye palette definitely is a little bit more intense, and by that it's probably going to be a little bit more suitable for like people with like medium skin tone in general. Because as I said, this elephant palette was more suitable for like light medium skin tone. If you are on the darker side of this kind of like a medium spectrum, I don't think this palette will work for you. Whereas, you know, judging by how this palette swatched, I think this is going to be suitable for like everyone who has like medium skin tone. So the following year in 2023, we had this leopard palette. That was our medium palette. And that's actually quite interesting because it looks like in 2023, Hourglass fixed most of the problems that we found in the 2022 edition. So I actually found this leopard palette perfect for my medium skin tone. And it doesn't really matter whether this was my winter or summer skin tone, it just worked perfectly. This is currently one of my favorite Hourglass palettes of all times. So here we have the comparison. As you can see, these palettes are actually quite different. They both look like they're perfectly suitable for medium skin tone, but the shades are actually quite different, especially the bronzer. I think this year the bronzers are much more cool toned in all of these palettes, I suppose. Anyway, so we've got swatches, we've got comparisons. Let's test this palette out now. So one thing that's going to be a little bit problematic is that we have 3 blushes and I only have like 2 cheeks, so what are we going to do with that? I don't know. So let's start with the bronzer. We only have 1 bronzer, so that's going to be easy. Yeah, this is my perfect bronzer shade. I don't even need to like build it up. It just applies really nicely and the shade suits my skin tone perfectly. The only thing is that this is a very neutral bronzer. It doesn't really have much warmth to it, so I'm not sure how this is going to look on someone who has very warm skin undertone. My skin has a very warm undertone, but it's more like peachy golden. I think it's someone's skin's undertone is more like yellow. These neutral bronzers might not look that great, but I'm only speculating here. It actually looks good enough on my skin and I do have warm undertones. Okay, the blushes now. I'm not really sure what to do. So this is a very cool toned blush and these 2 are on like a warmer side. So I definitely think I should use this one on one side of my face and maybe I'll use these 2 on the other side. I think that would make more sense. Okay, so let's start with this cool pink blush. That one is actually pretty intense already. You don't need much, but you can blend it out pretty easily. Okay, that was actually very pretty. I was a little bit apprehensive when I saw cool pink. But to be honest, Hourglass can actually create anything and that's always going to look pretty good. So yeah, this is our pink fusion blush. So I think what I'm going to do now is I'm going to try this Oasis blush first because it's definitely much lighter than the corally one. So let's go ahead and do that and then we'll think what to do next. Okay, I can't really see much of a blush situation here. I think this is going to be more of a highlighter type of thing, or maybe like a highlighting blush, because what I'm getting from it is a little bit of glow and a little bit of warmth, not necessarily much color here. So I mean, I could leave it like that. I could just use the bronzer and a little bit of this blush, but to be honest, I actually prefer to have some color on my cheeks. So I would probably use this as a kind of like a topper thing to add a little bit of glow to my blush. So let's go ahead and try this coral one now. I'm just going to apply here. And this is a pretty intense color. I need to blend it out a little bit so that it looks more natural. Okay, so you can definitely see that this side of my face has much more warmth to it. Whereas here you can definitely tell this is like a cool pink situation. So let's try this highlighter. Now I'm going to apply it on this side of my face where I have my cool pink blush. Yes, these highlighters are just so pretty. So this is a similar type of highlighter that we had in our Dragon palette. It's subtle. It's not going to accentuate anything that you don't want to be accentuated. It does look very flattering and it's perfectly suitable for medium skin tone. So what I'm going to do on this side, it is pretty glowy after applying this Oasis Glow shade. I'm just going to apply a little bit more of that where I would put my highlighter. And you know what? Yeah, I do think this is more of a blush topper slash highlighter for me. I don't think it's going to give me enough color for me to use it as a blush, but it works alright as a highlighter and it adds a little bit of warmth to the whole situation. Okay, so we're almost done. Let's blend everything together using this soft light finishing powder. And this shade is perfect for medium skin tone. And here we go. This is the Evil Eye palette on my face. We have the cool tone side of my face and then we have the warm side of my face. What do you think? Yeah, I think this is definitely going to be one of these palettes I'll be using quite a lot. Okay, time for me to wash this off and test our last palette, which is going to be the darkest one. And I'm not going to lie, it looks pretty dark, so I'm a little bit scared, but we'll see. Okay, time for our last palette of today. This is the Lotus Flower palette, and this one is supposed to be suitable for the deeper skin tones. So this is the Lotus Flower palette, the darkest one, and let me tell you, I mean, this one's pretty dark. So I will make it work somehow. Whether that's going to look good or not, that's another question. But yeah, it is a pretty dark palette. It looks beautiful though. So let's have a closer look at the shades. So first up we have a highlighter Gilded Strobe Light. This is a new shade described as Warm Bronze Gold. Next up we have a blush in Desert Flush. Another new shade, and this one is described as a Deep Beige Peach. This shade over here is the only one that is not new. So we've seen that already. This is Finishing Powder in Eternal Light, and it's described as Golden Amber. Next up we have another highlighter in Radiant Rose Strobe Light, and this is supposed to be a shimmering copper rose. Then we have another blush in Red O, and this is True Red. And then lastly we have a bronzer in Bronze Heat, and this is supposed to be Matte Deep Bronze. Okay, so these are the shades. They look really beautiful. Let's swatch them. So let's start with highlighters. The first one is Strobe Light. That is so beautiful. I mean, look at this shade. I hope I can make it work for my skin because that looks stunning. And then we have Radiant Rose Strobe Light, and there's no way I can use it as a highlighter. This is going to be like a blush, like a full-on blush on me, but again, that is good. If this is too dark for me, then there's a big chance that it's not going to be too light for someone with a deeper skin tone, but that is beautiful. Okay, let's test the blushes now. So first up we have Desert Flush. Okay, that looks like a perfect medium skin tone blush, which, you know, fine for me, but I don't think this is going to work for many like deeper skin tones. And oh, this one is pretty intense. So this is Red O. That is a beautiful shade. And then lastly we have this finishing powder, which is going to be a bronzer for me, I suppose, because look at that. And then the bronzer, yeah. So these two shades, I hopefully can blend them out to the point that they're going to work as a bronzer for me. So when I'm trying this on my face, I need to remember not to be too heavy-handed with these, because yes, they are pretty intense. Okay, so time to compare this to the previous releases. I'm going to start with our Tiger palette. That was the darkest palette of their 2020 holiday collection, and this is what it looked like. I mean, first of all, I think this is a really beautiful palette. The issue I had with it was I didn't have a bronzer. This is actually a finishing powder, which obviously, if you have lighter skin tone, you can use it as a bronzer. That was quite a beautiful palette. And here's a comparison to what we have this year. This is definitely much more cool toned this year, and it's also darker. Don't you think? It does look much darker to me, like in general, which is a step in the right direction. And in 2023 we had this Snake palette, and this is what it looked like. Here we have pretty much everything we need. We have a bronzer, a finishing powder. The only issue is that this finishing powder is definitely not going to be suitable for people with like a deeper skin tones. This is like a medium tan maybe. So even though this is like a really beautiful and quite dark palette, I think you can straight away tell that there is some room for improvement, right? And this is how it compares to our new palette, and you can see how much darker the finishing powder in this new one is. This looks better already. Okay, so these are the comparisons. Let's test this palette on my face now. So where do we start? I mean, obviously, as I said, this finishing powder is going to be more of a bronzer for me. So this is what I'm going to try and do. I'm going to try and use it as a bronzer. We'll see how that goes. So it's applied on this side of my face. Do you know what? This actually works pretty well as a bronzer. So obviously I didn't really have to build it up, but I didn't really have to be too cautious with this because it blended really nicely. So yeah, pretty good. I'm going to try the other bronzer, which is this like proper bronzer on the other side of my face. So with this one, as you can see, you have to be quite cautious if you have like a medium skin tone and you want to like have this palette and use it successfully. With this one, you definitely can't be too heavy-handed. I think the finishing powder, being a finishing powder, didn't really have that much pigmentation, so it's a little bit like safer to use in a medium skin tone, whereas this bronzer, I think you just have to be quite careful with that. It does blend really nicely, but sometimes if you apply too much product on your face, even blending will not really help to make it look good. Okay, so we have bronzer done. So now the blushes. Okay, I'm going to start with this one because this one actually scares me. It's very deep, dark. It looks beautiful, but yeah, let's just go ahead and try it out. Okay, it's not as scary as I thought it would be. Obviously, I'm very careful. I used a little bit of product only and kind of like blending out. You can see there's a really beautiful pigmentation to it. The shade is pretty intense. I mean, don't worry, I'm still going to blend it out a little bit, but you can definitely see that a little goes a long way here. You only need a little bit if you have medium skin tone, and the color is still going to show. So I'm going to blend everything together so that it looks more natural. Okay, so this is the red blush, not as scary as I thought it would be. And now what do we do now? Let's try this blush over here, but then we still have this highlighter, which is going to be more like a blush for my skin. But okay, step by step, let's do this blush first on the other side of my face. And okay, this is actually a perfect blush for medium skin tone, which means it shouldn't even be here, okay? This is a really beautiful color, but I mean, I can make those darker shades like work on my skin tone, but if someone has like a deeper skin tone, they might not have much use out of this shade. Really nice, really beautiful. Not to say something you should be able to find in a palette that's supposed to be for like deeper skin tones, but it does look pretty. Okay, time for highlighters. One of them scary, one of them less scary. So I'm going to start with the less scary one, and I'm just going to apply it the way I would normally use my highlighter. And let's say I'm going to try it on this side of my face. Ooh, that is so pretty. Look at this. This is beautiful. And again, that's not going to be something that's going to accentuate every single imperfection on your skin. It's very finely milled. It's glowy but not sparkly, not shiny. Love it. Okay, now time for this one. And this one scares me the most because I'm not really sure what to do with that. I don't think this is going to work as a proper highlighter for me. This is going to be more of a kind of like a highlighting topper over my brush. So that's how I'm going to use that. I'm just going to apply it a little bit lower and very gentle. I just don't really want to look like a clown. I mean, obviously I don't have plans of going out wearing this makeup anywhere today, but still I would prefer this to look somewhat acceptable. So I think I could potentially make it work as this kind of like a blush topper, as a highlighting blush topper. That's not probably something I would use all the time. I'll probably just keep this for those days that I have a little bit more tan on my skin, and I think it could look really pretty, but it's not really my go-to look, and it's not going to look particularly natural on my skin. So yeah, I think I could potentially make this palette work for me. As I said, it will probably look so much better if I had some tan on my skin, and now it definitely looks a little bit too intense, but I can see the potential of being able to use this palette next summer maybe. This palette definitely feels darker compared to the previous releases, which is a step in the right direction. The only issue I've got with this palette is, as I said before, this shade over here. I think this is a pretty medium skin tone blush, but at the same time I'm thinking if you have like a deeper skin tone, maybe you could use it as kind of like a brightening product instead of your highlighter if you want something a little bit more subtle, kind of like a low lighter situation. Other than that, this palette is pretty dark. I mean, it's too dark for my skin tone. I can make it work to some extent, but even the way I have it now, it definitely feels like it doesn't look natural on me. But that's how it's supposed to be, right? All in all, I really like this year's palette. I love the fact that we have so many new shades. I love the fact that these palettes are quite different to what we had last year and 2 years ago. Obviously, those issues that we had in 2022 were fixed last year, so this year it seems like they can only do better. And yeah, I can't wait what they're going to do next year. So this is my review of all three three new Hourglass palettes. What do you guys think? Have you tried any of these? Which one is your favorite? How do you think they compare to what was released last year and 2 years ago? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Thank you very much for watching. For more beauty related content, check those videos over here. I'm going to see you very soon. Take care. Bye.